Good evening and welcome to good evening and welcome to Jaw's Seattle Politics weekly podcast looking at the news. I hope you're having a good evening or morning or whatever, wherever you are. And let's start with local news of the past week. There was a fair amount. First of all, Boeing machinists have gone on strike as of Friday. It's the first strike since I believe 2008. And yeah, 33,000 workers are now on strike. The main issue, of course, is Boeing's relentless drive to streamline its operations and move operations to uh, non-union states like South Carolina or Kansas. Um, so, yeah, um, they are on strike, and relatively short strike won't affect Boeing financially, but anything longer than a couple of weeks, and historically these strikes have tended to drag on for a month or two at least, is going to affect Boeing's credit rating and Boeing's finances, and that's a fairly major statement considering that Boeing is uh, a company with a portfolio that's larger than that of many countries. It's a huge, huge multinational corporation. So, yeah, we'll see how this goes. The strike is primarily focused on the Seattle area, and uh, which where the workers are all unionized. The machinists are uh, trying to save their jobs, basically. We've seen a number of jobs shipped out of the state over the past 20 years or so, even though the state has bent over backward to give Boeing tax incentive to keep employees here. Boeing takes those incentives and then ships the jobs anyway. Boeing machinists are looking for some kind of guarantee that they're going to have a job throughout the length of the new contract. So, yeah, we'll see how Boeing responds to those demands. I'm not optimistic it's going to be a short strike. I think it's going to drag on, but we'll see. Um, Seattle City Council is back from vacation, which is never a good sign, given that the current city council is pretty reactionary. Um, they had a full 9-member committee that unanimously passed a reinstatement of the stay out ordinances. Now, for people who aren't familiar with that, that's an ordinance where an individual can be ordered by the court to stay away from certain designated neighborhoods because of prostitution or drug crime or whatever it is. Um, there are several neighborhoods that are named in this stay out ordinance, and it's important for the context to know that in 2020, that ordinance, which was on the books in Seattle for many decades, was repealed. And the reason it was repealed was that in the climate of the George Floyd protests, it was they were very sensitive to the fact that these stay out ordinances are disproportionately uh, implemented against people of color, against poor people, disadvantaged people, and yeah, but that no longer matters to Seattle City Council because it's got a lot of new members who don't care about such things. So even though this was pointed out to them repeatedly in the public comment, which was overwhelmingly against this ordinance, they didn't care. They didn't care about the public comment. They didn't care about the history. When this was on the books for many decades, of course, it didn't really solve any problems. And you can't point to it being effective in addressing the problems from these particular neighborhoods because they kept being problems. So, despite the banning of some individuals from the neighborhoods, because there are always other individuals who are going to replace them, and you're playing whack-a-mole in terms of law enforcement. Because if you say you can't congregate on this block, well, they'll move up a block. It's not that complicated to understand. Um, but that is what Seattle City Council did this week. They are going to have a final vote on that proposed ordinance next Tuesday. So, for people who care about this and want to offer public comment, which will probably be ignored, but it's worth putting on the record anyway, it will be next Tuesday in the morning. So, be there or be square. We had a debate this week, and it's not the one you're thinking of, which I'll get to in a minute. It was the debate for governor, the first of two between Dave Reichert, the Republican nominee, and Bob Ferguson, the Democratic nominee. Um, all I will say about that is that Ferguson had a much stronger performance. Reichert spent a lot of time running away from his affiliation with Donald Trump, and going back to sort of hearkening to the days when he was first running for Congress, and the Seattle Times endorsed him because he was a conscience-driven independent. Well, his conscience is extremely anti-gay. It's got a long track record of being enthusiastic about Donald Trump, even though he did not seek the Republican Party endorsement for his run because there was another Trump-loving candidate in the primary race that got the endorsement instead, and so he's trying to distance himself from his past in that sense, and it's not going to work. So Ferguson is the prohibitive favorite in that race, and it's for a reason. He's put in a much stronger debate performance, in my opinion. So, speaking of debates, we had one nationally this past week between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and it was revealing in all the wrong ways. Some 60 million viewers got to see Harris successfully bait Donald Trump into giving emotional responses to her to her bait in ways that were not helpful. Um, we saw her, for instance, question his crowd size and saying people were leaving early because they were exhausted or bored. And he lost it on that one and eventually wound up invoking the internet rumor and the right wing fever swamp of Haitian immigrants, Haitian illegals, according to him, eating pets, eating dogs, eating cats, was his quote. First of all, the Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, are there legally, and there is no evidence that anything like that has been happening. The city officials have all been saying since it started being a rumor that they haven't gotten any reports of this. There's no evidence for it, etc. They were back in the news this week because in the wake of Donald Trump saying this in the debate, City Hall got to shut down, the library had to get shut down, schools had to get shut down because of bomb threats from less hinged MAGA supporters. And so the mayor is on TV saying we need help, not hate. The reason they need help is that the immigrant population in Springfield in the last decade has increased the city's population by about 25%, which is a lot. So they don't have roads that are built for it anymore. Springfield had this kind of population 50, 60 years ago before they started losing manufacturing jobs. But those jobs have come back now, thanks to Joe Biden. And they've had those business owners have had a labor shortage because Springfield didn't have enough residents to fill the jobs. So word got around and the Haitians came and they were welcomed by the local business owners, which is a piece you're not going to hear from Trump or J.D. Vance, who initially started this rumor by saying he was getting calls from constituents, some mythical constituents, complaining about this. It's completely unverified. And Vance has been doubling down on this, even though, at least in theory, the Haitians are his constituents also. And the mayor of Springfield, Ohio, is his constituent also. This started last year, apparently, when a Haitian immigrant had a fender bender with a school bus that unfortunately killed an 11-year-old boy. And that started the anti-immigrant kind of thing that had to making circles, making its way through the fever swamp. And now it's turned into dogs and cats and pets. So People on the internet have been having fun with this and making memes and so forth, but it's really not funny. It's turning into bomb threats. It's turning into threats to the safety of the immigrants and of other people in Springfield, school children, etc. This is what happens when you get extremely reckless people who are nominees for president. Trump generally had a really bad debate. He couldn't stop lying. He couldn't answer questions or wouldn't answer questions. And the number of lies that he told, um, I couldn't even keep pace with them. They came so fast and furious. He, um, he was playing the greatest hits of all his mythical end of the bar drunk uncle stories, but he did not have a good debate at all. And this was reflected. I mean, Republicans know he didn't have a good debate. He knew he didn't have a good debate. And then at the end of the debate, Taylor Swift, who is basically the Beatles in terms of pop music, pop culture these days, she came out and endorsed Kamala Harris. And the Instagram post in which she did it had a photo of her holding her cat, which is kind of hilarious. Um, uh, Another childless cat lady. That's how she signed it. So um, that may be all over. And then Donald Trump this morning came out with a tweet in caps, of course, with exclamation points because that's how he rolls. I hate Taylor Swift. And a few hours later, um, there was another apparent assassination attempt at his golf course in West Palm Beach, Florida, which is near Mar-a-Lago. Um, a Secret Service agent operating, in advance of Trump, they move a hole or so ahead of where his party is on the golf course, and he noticed the muzzle of a gun sticking out of the bushes, and fired at the gun, scared the assailant away. A witness took a photo of the license plate and sent it to law enforcement, who in turn send it to automatic plate readers on the major highways. And lo and behold, he was apprehended about a half hour later on I-95 in adjoining Martin County, Florida. What we know about the alleged assailant or would be assailant is that he is from Hawaii, actually North Carolina. He moved to Hawaii fairly recently. He is uh, avidly pro Ukraine. He'd been trying to recruit people to go fight on behalf of Ukraine. Um, he tried to volunteer for the foreign legion that's fighting in Ukraine, and they wouldn't have him. They thought he was too unbalanced, or they didn't say exactly, but that's the impression you get. His social media presence is really unhinged. This is a disturbed man who follows through on all the things that he wants to do. So he followed through on this, unfortunately, and we're going to hear a lot about him. He is a former Trump supporter in 2016, uh, turned Nikki Haley supporter this year. Um, so he has a Republican background, but honestly, that's less important than the fact that he's got a few screws loose. So we're going to hear a lot about him in the coming days, I'm sure. Um, it's good when the Secret Service can do their job well, as opposed to the past assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania. Um, but you really hope that there are no more violent incidents in the course of this campaign for any candidate, either candidate, or their surrogates or their families. Um, there's just too many guns in this country. The suspect in this case dropped an AR-15 at the scene, which was later recovered. Um, again, those are weapons of war, which should not be legal in this country. And unfortunately, uh, uh, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are really, really, really pro gun culture, not just pro gun. Harris and Walz are gun owners as well, but they believe in sensible gun regulation. Trump and Vance do not. They will, you know, veto any piece of gun legislation that comes across their desk, as Trump really did during his reign. So that happened today. Unfortunately, fortunately, Trump is safe to continue his malign presence on the campaign trail. But yeah, it wasn't good. Meanwhile, climate change has been in the news this week. We had Hurricane Francine, who made landfall in Louisiana over earlier this week, and then right now we've got a unnamed tropical storm which is threatening the Carolina coast, and that's going to bring possible rain and flooding to that region of the country, the southeast, North and South Carolina, and then inland from that up through the Appalachians. Um, this has been a very active tropical storm season. And again, the reason for that is that the ocean waters and the waters in the Gulf of Mexico are much warmer than they've ever been historically because our climate is much warmer than it's ever been historically. And that makes the formation of tropical storms much easier. It makes the tropical storms themselves more powerful. We saw with Francine before it made landfall, it intensified into a hurricane and into a level 2 hurricane very rapidly. And this rapid intensification of storms as they approach the coast, any coastline, is something that we're seeing now more regularly with tropical storm depressions. And it is, again, a function of the water temperature in these saltwater havens where tropical storms tend to form. And it's making them much more powerful, much more quickly, and that makes it hard for people on the coast to prepare. We had quite a bit of flooding due to storm surge and heavy rains in Louisiana and inland in the Mississippi Valley this week. So, yeah, we're probably going to have another couple months of that, unfortunately. We had an interesting story coming out of Florida this week. Nothing to do with Trump, thank goodness, but it had to do with Governor Ron DeSantis, who sent his election police, that's the basically law enforcement task force that he formed to root out election cheating, which is a staple of right-wing paranoia ever since Donald Trump claimed that he won the 2020 election. Which everybody has to pretend is true, and so you have to have election police to go after the non-existent fraud. Well, he sent them after Latino activists who've been registering voters in Florida. Now, remember that Florida this year has not only the presidential election on the ballot, but it has a basically an initiative question as to whether to repeal the 6-week the ban on abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy, which, as most sensible people know, many women don't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. So it's effectively a total ban on abortions, no exceptions for rape or incest. There's a question on the Florida ballot as to whether to repeal that or not. And we know in other Republican-leaning states like Kansas and Ohio, when that's been on the ballot, they just tended to pass. Abortion protections are popular across the board, even with Republicans, even with independents. And that's going to turn out voters in Florida to the point where it's entirely possible that Kamala Harris could win Florida this year, if the turnout is great enough. Florida is in play. Texas is possibly in play as well. North Carolina is definitely in play, as I mentioned last week. The Cook Report, which is a political prognosticator that has a lot of adherents, has a lot of mainstream respect, now says that North Carolina is a toss-up. So Harris got a bump, and of course she got a huge fundraising bump as well. Just shy of $100 million from her debate performance this week. She came off as presidential. Donald Trump came off as a petulant 5-year-old child. And, that's the way it was. She baited him very successfully. because she's a former prosecutor and she has those skills. She can get people to say what she wants when they're on the stand, and she got Donald Trump to say what she wanted. She had this big uh, poop eating grin on her face when Trump started talking about dogs and cats. It's like, yes, I got him. I got him to go there, and he did. Um, so, yeah, he did not have a good performance at all. Trump has historically approached debates, and this is the reason he doesn't really prepare for them in terms of policy questions, because he doesn't offer policy questions. He offers platitudes, such as his reassurance that after he repeals Obamacare as president, he does he have a replacement for Obamacare in mind? Well, he has concepts of a plan, which that got a lot of ridicule on the internets. But he has actually said that before. He said that in 2019 that he had the concept of a plan to replace repealing Obamacare. He has promised on multiple occasions, going back, nearly a decade, that he would produce a plan, that he had a plan that he was going to show everybody, et cetera, et cetera. And it never shows up because he doesn't have a plan, because he doesn't bother himself with those kind of details. He's much more interested in the pitch, as any good con man would be. Once people buy the pitch, he doesn't really care about the aftermath because he's got their money, or in this case, your votes. Um, that's all he wants. And it's not entirely clear, and I've said this before, and I'll keep saying it until November, that it's not entirely clear that Donald Trump needs your votes, because he's going to claim he won regardless. And he's going to claim that he won even though he clearly lost by sizable margins. Um, he's not going to concede. He just won't. He will. He is making plans now, and his supporters are making plans now to try and challenge the results in November. And if they're not successful at that, to resort to violence to try and prevent Kamala Harris from being the next president. Hopefully, the Democrats are gaming this out as well and trying to figure out what they will do in response, both legally and on the ground. We may have to be hitting the streets in December and January. We'll see. It's going to be a very interesting season. And of course, I'll cover it all because I'll be right here in this room, which I'll be hopefully decorating soon. Yeah. But thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. I should mention internationally. Um, the Middle East was back in the news this week. Israel sent its army, the IDF, back into a couple of cities in the West Bank. A reminder: West Bank is totally separate as a political entity now from the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip is controlled by Hamas, which is a political party, not a terrorist organization. The West Bank is controlled by the Palestinian Authority, which is a rival to the Hamas regime, and which really has nothing to do with Hamas. But the IDF is trying to target it anyway because their real agenda is not so much the eradication of Hamas, it's the eradication of Palestinians as a viable political entity that can get its own state. You have a lot of politicians in this country that are still paying lip service to the two-state solution, even though Israel has intentionally and gradually made that a moot point on the ground for at least a decade by sending so-called settlers in to steal Palestinian land, and they live in the Palestinian areas now. They are killing Palestinians with pretty much impunity, and yeah, you would have to get them to move again in order to create any kind of a Palestinian state, and that's simply not going to happen. You've got too many people politically in Israel right now, including those in the ruling coalition of Benjamin Netanyahu, who believe in Israel from the river to the sea. That is Israel with no room for Palestinians. That is the reality on the ground right now. And that is what the IDF is trying to um, move toward in their relentless bombing attacks on Gaza Strip and on their attacks now on the West Bank as well. Um, and some 40,000 plus Palestinians have died needlessly, I might add, in um, this campaign. While Israel claims all along that it's trying very hard to avoid civilian deaths, Hamas is just using them as human shields, which, that may be true here and there. It's not true for all 40,000 people, I promise you. Um, unless you think Hamas is everywhere, sort of like the boogeyman. We got Halloween coming soon. We could use that. We also have the anniversary of the October 7th attacks by Hamas, which kicked off this campaign. And I think we're going to see in various different parts of the world, including possibly in the United States, um, some terrorist attacks against Israeli or Jewish targets to try and mark that occasion. Um, I hope there's not violence again, but I'm afraid that will be the case. And we'll see how that plays out. We'll see if it has any impact on the presidential race. You have two candidates who are both ostensibly pro Israel. Of course, the flavor of pro-Israel is a little different. Harris at least acknowledges the plight of Palestinians, whereas Donald Trump will do anything that Netanyahu tells him to because he's just like that with strong men. That was one of the other highlights from the debate is when uh, Harris baited him by saying that world leaders laugh at him. And he said, well, Viktor Orban in Hungary thinks I'm wonderful and he's highly respected. Well, that's true. Orban does love him, but he is not highly respected. He is a strong man who has basically turned a democracy in Hungary into a dictatorship. So it's no wonder that he and Trump have a love affair going on. In fact, Orban is uh, very celebrated among the right wing in general. The mainstream, not right wing, not just the fringe. CPAC, the uh, big conservative conference, went to Hungary a couple of years ago. You've had Tucker Carlson going to Hungary and interviewing Orban with softball questions. Um, so this is not exactly a character reference for Donald Trump. And Harris baited him into saying that as well. So, yeah, she had a great debate, as she really did, because she accomplished exactly what she wanted to accomplish and exactly what Donald Trump, his campaign thinkers, the campaign manager and his advisors and such, really didn't want to have happen. They wanted him to stick on message, and he didn't. He couldn't answer as a question. He would immediately pivot to whatever his stem speech talking point came to mind. He spent a lot of time demonizing immigrants with a flurry of just factually untrue rhetoric. But, that's rhetoric, as we saw in Springfield this week, that has real world consequences. I think this is going to be a season of violence. I hope I'm wrong. But when you've got a major presidential candidate who is really encouraging violence, tacitly, if not explicitly, and I think it'll be explicit after he loses, you're going to have a very difficult campaign season. So with that, I'll sign off for now. We'll be back next week with more developments, and have a great week, everybody.